Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good and restful break. As I mentioned in my class, when you get older, and this may be true for some of you all, hopefully you did not prescribe to this, but if you did, I respect it. But when you get older, you become an adult, breaks just basically mean this is when I take time to catch up. That's what I did on Thursday, and then Friday I went to a conference, so didn't really get much time off other than my weekend normal time. But we are moving on to the downswing of the semester. So the good news is that I think that the topics we're going to be talking about moving forward are going to be a lot more interesting than UML diagrams. Okay, that's not to say the UML diagrams are completely going away. For those of you who are planning on taking the final exam, they will be present, but we're going to take a break for them for at least the next 5 chapters, the final 5 chapters of the semester. That being said, there are some advancements that I wanted to get out of the way, just because I think that these are going to be more noteworthy. I will continue updating you throughout the semester, but I think it's worthwhile to take a look and see where we stand with respect to this semester. First and foremost, probably in all likelihood, we will not be meeting on November 11th. And I want to make a note of that we will not be meeting, which probably sounds like, okay, well, you guys don't have anything on November 11th. Unfortunately, I wish it were that easy. Okay, I wish it were so easy that I could just change the schedule and just basically cancel stuff out. Unfortunately, I've got a pretty rigorous schedule. So there were 2 options. All right. The first option is that I could cancel class completely on November 11th, and we would move it back. And if you look in the schedule, I actually accommodate for this. Okay, I account for this. I actually have an open class on the 14th, which is kind of my snow day class. And that would basically move everything up forward a few days. I thought about doing that, and I said, I'm sure that people are not excited about being in class on the day right before Thanksgiving break. And usually my tradition has been, as long as the class performs well, and this class is performing reasonably well, I will give students off on that particular Friday. So when this came up, I said, all right, there's the option of doing that, or there's the option of not meeting for class, but having everybody watch a video outside of class. And that's kind of where I was going to. So on November 11th, we're supposed to cover chapter 14, which is information security and computer fraud, a pretty important topic. So I'm not going to cancel the lecture, but I am going to cancel the class meeting, which I will have the lecture recorded at some point in the very near future. And you all have to watch that on your own time. If you want to watch it during this class period, we could actually try to open the computer lab and you could watch it on your own computers and pretend like you're in the actual environment, or you can watch it on your own. Don't care. I just have something that I'm going to have to be doing. It's a research project that I will be in a different classroom at that time, so I can't be in 2 places at once, at least, because they haven't invented that time turner that they talked about in Harry Potter. So that's kind of the reason for that. So my plan is not meeting on the class and not meeting on that day and still letting you all have off on Friday. If anybody's got a particularly big problem with that, if you say, well, Dr. Barnes, I would rather have the class meeting so we can meet and be on there Friday, feel free to email me and let me know. My expectation for that email arriving is very low, okay? And if it is, it's going to be one person who's just trying to rock the boat, okay? You shouldn't stir them up, guys. You shouldn't try to make things, shouldn't try to rock the boat there. So that's going to be the goal there. I will keep you updated on that and remind you. I will let you know when I have that recording posted. I do actually have it recorded from previous semesters, but I'm going to try to record a specific one for this particular course. As far as the rest of the schedule goes, there's not too much that we need to be aware of. We are going to have NetSuite assignments for the next 4 weeks. There are deliverables for each of the NetSuite assignments, but there will not be a do your or work on your own activity for the way there was for the 3rd NetSuite assignment. That doesn't mean I wouldn't like to do one. It just we don't have the time to, the way their schedule's set up. So next 4 Wednesdays, we'll be doing NetSuite activities. We'll also be covering a chapter every week. And so that's going to be kind of our routine for the next few weeks. Things will get a little bit dicey when we get to a little bit closer to Thanksgiving, because we do have an exam, if you notice, on the 18th, which is the Monday before Thanksgiving break. We'll have our results discussion before that. So please keep that in mind. There are a couple other things you need to note for dates. So first of all, professional interaction write-ups are due that Friday. Even though we're not meeting with class, that's the due date. If you have not already done your professional interaction, get that out of the way. Do not wait till the week of Thanksgiving. If you email me on the week of Thanksgiving and say, Dr. Barnes, I haven't done my professional interaction yet, what do you suggest? And I say, I suggest that you're probably going to get a 0 for this assignment. And I don't want to have that suggestion be the case. So please make sure you get that out of the way. You've done that. You don't need to do the interaction right up yet, but you do need to do the interaction sometime soon because the opportunities are going to be limited. There is a big one that's occurring this coming Wednesday, Wednesday afternoon. So basically right after the bridge ceremony, we're going to be doing a roundtable with a bunch of executives in leadership. It'll be a good opportunity for that interaction if you've not already gotten one out of the way. And then, yeah, that's kind of the case. Presentations are coming up in week 15. We'll be doing presentations during that week. Groups have already been assigned. Most of the topics have already been assigned. The only thing that really hasn't been assigned is presentation dates. As I said, if there's one of these dates that you absolutely cannot present on, or there's only one date that you can present on, take care of that now rather than later. Nothing causes me so much more frustration as to me announce this 2 months in advance. And then a week before week before the presentations, somebody says, "Oh, I can't present on that date. I'm going to be out of town." So how long did you know this? Well, I've known this since the beginning of the semester, but I'm just now telling you about it. If you know now that you're not going to be able to present on one of these dates, you're doing something on one of them, please let me know. I understand if things come up, but if you were aware of this and then you let me know after the fact, that creates a lot of frustration on my part. So please make sure you know what dates. For context, I would like to keep it to 2 presentations on the Monday of the 2nd, 2 presentations on Monday the 4th, and 1 presentation on the 6th. That's kind of how I've got it set up. Those are variable, but that's where I'd like to be. All right, with that, I think we've done all the updates that I'm going to talk about. I will keep you updated on those, but it is your responsibility to make sure you know what's coming up in the near future and what your responsibilities for those are. You can only rely on Brightspace so much. That's why I brought up the syllabus at this point. Today, we're going to be talking about data analytics and accounting, which is personally one of my favorite topics because there's a lot that we can discuss and discover in this particular area. And data analytics means different things to different people, and it can be used for good and it can be used for not so good purposes. One of the ones, it's a little bit dated, it's about 8 years old, but it has to do with something called Cambridge Analytica. Has anybody ever heard of this organization? So this is a British research firm that had contracted with Facebook back around 2015 to gather information according to its user, according to using Facebook user profiles. Now, this was supposed to be one of those things that if you were a Facebook user, you volunteered to this. You had an option to saying, "Okay, I will allow you to access my data so that I can answer this quiz." And it was just basically a quiz about preferences, and they were using it again for supposed research purposes. What ended up happening became a very, very big, there's a big uproar surrounding this. So there were a few things that were, first of all, going on with this. First of all, when Facebook users were opting into this quiz, there was some kind of fine print that they didn't notice. They weren't just accessing the profiles of the Facebook users themselves, but they were accessing anybody who was on the friend list of those Facebook users as well. So think about how many friends you might have via social media. If one person said, "All right, I'm going to one person on your list that I'm going to allow access," you were opted into that access as well by being a friend of that individual. So I believe it was 270,000 people who actually did perform this quiz, who actually installed this app and performed this quiz on Facebook, which ended up compiling into 87 million user accounts on Facebook. So 87 million different items were identified. The reason this is such a big deal is Cambridge Analytica. The reason it was so renowned is there was a lot of concern that they were influencing the presidential election in the United States at the time. Now we're in the midst of a presidential election that's going on, but one of the campaigns, I'm not going to talk about which, because I'm not trying to sway you in one direction or another. One of the campaigns used this, and they used this information to try to sway potential voters who were kind of leaning or hadn't made a decision, or try to sway them in that direction. And so, yeah, big uproar about this, and Cambridge Analytica had admitted that they did not use the information for the intended purpose. It was not used for research purposes, but it was subcontracted out for other purposes, which is a prime example of how data, when it's collected, it can be used for purposes that are not intentional or purposes that we do not want it to be used for. So keeping that in mind, we want to consider what is the value of data and how we can look at it in ways that are productive and suit purposes that we think would be appropriate for. So there's this concept called big data. And by big data, I don't mean this, okay? Although this is in the slides and I couldn't resist this. I say I'm going to stop making this joke every single semester and I never stop making it. It's very corny, but I still make the joke, okay? There's a big data right there. But what do we mean by big data? The definition of big data is voluminous amounts of data that are generated every day by people. So pretty big story, like large volumes of data. And we can actually characterize big data according to something called 5V. All right, 5V. So huge volume, a lot of information out there. High velocity, it's moving very, very rapidly. High variety, there's a lot of different types of data. Low veracity. Has anybody ever heard that term veracity before? So yeah, you're on the right tracks. It's basically quality. It's basically accuracy would be a better, but would kind of be the more appropriate term for the as a measure of quality. So we talk about low accuracy or low veracity. We're talking about this information is not always applicable. Now, this kind of brings up an important point. All right. Not everything that you read on the internet is accurate. All right. Does everybody know that that's the case, that you may read things on the internet that's not particularly relevant? I know it's wonderful to say, okay, I'm just going to work on this research paper. I'm going to get all my sites from Wikipedia. Okay. Now, Wikipedia is actually somewhat quality. They do provide some references. And I will tell you, if you're going to do a research paper and use Wikipedia, don't cite Wikipedia. Okay. Go to the bottom of the Wikipedia page and pull your sources from that. Okay. That's where you get the correct sources. But it is subject to manipulation, and sometimes you'll find that in there. People who have edit access to Wikipedia will throw things in there that are not particularly accurate. And that's just one example of a site. You can actually go to sources where there are generally information that's completely inaccurate. So we could talk about some very, very biased political leanings, political ideology blogs tend to report information that are not accurate. So that's still data, but it's not necessarily accurate or data with veracity. Okay. And then we have high value. Now you'll notice a star by high value. This is actually not identified in the textbook, but is extremely relevant. Extremely relevant. So in the book, they actually talk about 4V. For this course, I want you to remember 5V, and you do need to know all of these plus their relevant directions, okay? And all of them are very high with the exception of veracity, which is low, so that's an easy way to remember it. Now, how much effect does big data have? And so first of all, I want to talk about, I'm going to actually have a couple of citations in the next few chapters we talk about from McKinsey Worldwide Institute. Now, there may be, if you've ever watched Last Week Tonight, that's one of my favorite shows to watch. I actually watch a lot of YouTube clips of that, of John Oliver. There may be some criticism of using McKinsey because McKinsey's kind of a think tank and they've got kind of a shady reputation. But I do think there's some interesting characteristics and interesting facts that comes out. And this is just directly quoted from the book, so I don't want you to think that I'm buying into that. I just wanted to kind of put this in the context of how we should look at this information. And we're going to look at it in both contexts, okay? And in both situations, we're going to look at the same context. So McKinsey Global Institute estimated that big data could generate up to $3 trillion in value per year in just a subset of the industries that are impacted by this. Now, put this in the context of the global GDP, all right? The global GDP is roughly $100 trillion annually. So 3% of that could be just coming from big data sources. That's how valuable data is. We can think about any other asset that an organization generates, and it's unlikely there's any other asset that could even come close to that as far as aggregate impact. So we think about the kind of assets that we traditionally view from an accounting perspective. We say, all right, well, there's inventory. We think about equipment. We think about property. We think about receivables. Think about cash. All those kind of are minor in comparison to the value that we can actually generate as data. And the interesting thing is that we don't consider data to be a traditional asset from an accounting perspective. Like if you ask, what is data listed on the balance sheets? It's like, it's not listed on the balance sheet, Dr. Barnes. It's like, but does it have value? It does have value, certainly. So why don't we record that as accountants? The answer is, I don't know, okay? There may be because it's very difficult to quantify as to what the value of a particular piece of data is. But we note that it does have value, even though it's not listed as an asset from an accounting perspective, all right? And Chris Pratt there, Corey, this is kind of sad because Angie's not actually here today, but I'm sure he would appreciate that. I hope you appreciate this video, Andrew. I hope you appreciate the video. Anyway, it's Andrew Dwyer, but Andrew Dwyer's not here. Okay, so I'm going to shut up now. Actually, all right. So for data analytics, basically we're talking about the process of extracting value from big data. All right. So we need to be able to transform information to use of value. So this is the science of examining raw data, removing excess noise, and organizing the data with the purpose of drawing conclusion for decision making. Now, this seems like a pretty rote definition, but it contains some very important elements that we need to understand in order to be able to make use of the data. So examining raw data. So this is kind of the first step to understand. We saw raw data. Data in itself is basically a raw item, whereas we kind of contrast with information. Now, I'm going to go ahead and openly say that it's likely I will use the terms data and information interchangeably in this course unintentionally. All right. I think we all do that kind of at a basic level, but data and information are completely separate items. Data is basically untransformed information, or conversely, information is transformed data. The way I think about it, it's the way I like to think about everything. So we think about food, okay? You think about what do you have in a cheeseburger? Cheeseburger's information, that's the transformed item, but what's in there, okay? You've got the bread, you've got the hamburger, you've got the cheese, you got the pickles, okay? Because you have to have pickles on a cheeseburger. It's just, you can't argue with me on that one, okay? All right. But whatever the ingredients are in there, those are the pieces of data that go into that. And you could actually go back to even more component ingredients. You could say, all right, well, hamburger is effectively ground beef, Dr. Barnes, and bread has its own ingredients. Yeah, you can get very, very detailed. At the very basic level, we're talking about what are the untransformed items that we use to comprise information. All right. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to remove excess noise. Now, this term noise, we're not literally talking about sound. Noise is basically anything that interferes with the information transformation. So easy way to think about this is think about kind of like a water filtration system. All right, you want to have pure, clean water for whatever dish you're making. You want to make sure that it doesn't have any chemicals or any pollutants in there. So you run it through a water filter. That's kind of what we're going to do. Is we're going to filter all of this data to make sure that it only contains the items that we need for our particular use. And then we want to organize the data, because the only way we can actually obtain any meaning from it is to have organizations. And we're going to talk about organizations in the term of this concept of querying, okay? Query, Q-U-E-R-Y. And basically all that means is we're going to ask questions of the data. We're going to say, what does the data tell us? And it's going to provide results. This is such an expansive process that we're not going to even conclude today, okay? We're not going to even conclude the discussion. We're going to actually talk about some of the steps in that. We're going to finish the steps next week when we get to chapter 11. The good news is we're going to take a look at some tools that we can use for that. So for our next 2 Excel assignments, we're going to be working through different aspects of data analysis. Plus on next week, chapter 11. I don't know why I said Thursday. Next week, chapter 11 on Monday, we're actually going to be using a separate tool called Power BI. Some of you may have some use or some experience with that. I will tell you, I am not a Power BI super user. My knowledge in that is fairly limited, but I do think there's some interesting things we can do with it. And we're going to run through a very basic routine to explain how we can use this for data analysis. So yeah, data analytics is going to be kind of our focus moving forward in this chapter and the next chapter. So the first thing we need to know about data analytics, they're basically going to be comprised of 2 steps, 2 very general steps. All right. Now, it's an exhaustive process, but we can actually categorize this in a few ways. First one is going to be called extract, transform, and load. You may hear me use the term data cleaning or data validation, and these are all subsets of this idea of extract, transform, and load. It's basically the process of cleaning and preparing the data for analysis. You've probably already done this in your own situation. And I can think about a pretty practical example. Everybody in this course has taken 221 managerial accounting, and you had to do a financial statement analysis probably for that course. I know when I taught the course, that's one thing I did, and I think that most of the instructors still do that. So you were taking data that was provided from the financial statements, which you could argue that was information, but for your purposes, it was data. And you took those financial statements and you organized the information, put it into a spreadsheet, and then you took the pieces of information and kind of formatted it into a format that you wanted for presentation purposes. You put dollar signs on there. You organize the information so that you could create formulas, so that you could actually compute ratios. All of this would be examples of preparing the data for eventual use. Now, extract, transform, and load is interesting in the fact that you think that this is kind of the boring part of it. And when I worked in data analytics, it was, okay? This is the part where we actually prep the data for eventual analysis. Now, the bad news is if you're really, really excited about data analysis and you really want to get to that point where you start running the queries, that is usually the minor part of this particular process. Data cleansing and then preparation, this ETL process, it is by far the majority. At minimum, it usually takes about 50% of the time. For really, really difficult data sets, it can be much more arduous. We can actually work through 90%. We can go through 90% of the process. And I'm going to talk about an example of that. There's a few very, very compelling examples, particularly if you're using for open data sets or if you're using for data sets that you personally did not prepare. This ETL process can not only be really important, but it can be very, very challenging. And so we need to be aware this is probably what's going to comprise the majority of our time is getting the data ready so we can actually use it for whatever purpose. Now, once we got the data ready, we move on to the second step, which is going to be our process and analyze. Process and analyze is just what I said. This is where we actually dissect and study the data to make sound and timely business decisions. Our usual tool for this, this course in particular, is going to be called a query, which I have already defined as just a question that we ask of the data. We're going to look at the data. We're going to see what type of information can we glean from this data. How can we actually transform this data into useful purposes? So what are going to be the impacts? So let's talk about very generally the business impact, and then we'll move on to the accounting impact. So with respect to business, data analytics enable business to identify future opportunities and risks. So we know that usually the best indicator of future performance is going to be past performance. By using past performance and looking at trends and expectations, we can predict what we believe future performance is going to be. The organization has seen a 4% increase in sales since the past 5 years. We can predict that next year is probably going to be a similar increase, and we can account accordingly. Also, they affect internal processes, improving productivity and utilization and growth. So these planning tools, these planning items will allow organizations not only to plan for what the future is going to be, but to make better business decisions and respond accordingly. This is particularly important in times of volatility and change, as we're starting to see in this current day and age. One of the things we're going to talk about in great depth later on in this course in a few weeks, we're going to talk about the impact of artificial intelligence. If artificial intelligence is changing the way that organizations do business, then they better have a plan for addressing that particular problem. And this is something that analytics can help with. In terms of accounting, financial accounting data analytics can be used to scan the environment and identify potential risks and opportunities to the firm. We already know that businesses are subject to risks. That's the reason that we have these things called controls. When identifying what risks are there, the better job we can do of identifying risks, the better we can do in implementing controls to respond to those. Also, they can reduce the time auditors spend on gathering evidence, allowing them to focus on professional judgment and evaluating risks such as fraud. This is kind of a foreshadowing for those of you in accounting who are going to be taking auditing. But one of the biggest questions that we have in auditing is how do we actually perform the work necessary for our job? And that becomes a big question of what is the necessary volume of work and what are the limitations that we're subject to. The more that we can rely on data analysis, the more work that we can do and the more information we can gather to gain better assurance about our job. And that's a really, really big context because the assurance is kind of the core foundation of this particular concept. If we have more assurance, then we basically are providing more reliability in our assessments to our clients. All right, so moving forward, we're going to be talking about something called the AMPS model, and this is going to be a way for approaching data analysis. And this is something that's kind of the brainchild of the author, Vernon Richardson. And I really like it because it provides a context for any type of data set, how we're going to approach the data. And we're going to be using this model for all of our tasks when we start talking about this in Excel this coming Friday and next Friday. We're going to start with we're going to work through the AMPS model. So what is the AMPS model? It's just 4 simple steps. It's not this type of amp, by the way, okay? That's an amplifier, which is kind of cool, but unfortunately not very relevant to our course. All right, so AMPS model is just an acronym, all right? Ask the question, master the data, perform the analysis, and share the story. So this seems very, very simple, and it is, but it actually is a really important approach because that actually it outlines kind of the important steps that we need to have for approaching data. So let's talk about all of these steps individually and what they imply. Okay, and here's another diagram that I threw up here. Okay. So first of all, ask the question. So the answer model starts with asking questions that should be addressed with the data. Okay. When we look at data, we can actually determine what does this data tell us, or what potentially could this data tell us. This is something that's actually very relevant. My graduate students right now are working on a data analysis project, and they've come up with really good questions. One thing that I've asked them is said, okay, this is an interesting question. Can your data answer that question? And you have to be able to look at the data set itself and determine, are these relationships existent, or does the data contain the detail that I need to actually convert to information? So some examples that we might commonly use in business, all right? Which product is most profitable at stores in Missouri? So if we had information about stores that were a company that had stores in Missouri, and we wanted to know, say Walmart might be an example, the Walmart chain in Missouri. You want to look at all the stores in Missouri at Walmart chains, so we say, what is the most popular product at Walmart chains in Missouri? They look at their data and says, that's weird. We're selling a lot of cheeseburgers in Kirksville. How weird is that? You know, that's we call that the Barnes influence right there. All right. All right. Why are our costs increasing in the West but decreasing in the East? What are some reasons for that? Could they be geographic factors? Could they be geothermal factors? Can we actually identify a trend that we can explain using the data? What is the probability our audit client will go bankrupt or need to restate its financial statements? This is actually an interesting question, and one that we can actually come up with an answer for based on existing analysis, something we're going to do next week, actually. So being able to ask the question, looking at the data and say, do we have the detail that we need in order to provide this information? The next step is going to be mastering the data, all right? So identifying which data are suitable for our questions. Data questions include, can we actually get the needed data to answer the questions? The data so it's data accessibility. Data reliability, is the data clean? This is probably the most important of these 4 items, because cleaning the data sounds like it's very, very straightforward, but there are some data that we can't clean and we can't use for any purpose. Good example of this. Can we say that filming people crossing intersection is a form of data gathering? Absolutely, okay, absolutely. But could we answer demographic information necessarily on the basis of video information? We could generally. We could kind of say, all right, this person looks like they're in college, whereas this person looks like they're retired. But it's very, very hard to depict what the age is just looking at somebody crossing a video or intersection. So the cleanliness of data is certainly problematic, because we have to know, based on the qualities of the data, the detail the data gathers, can we actually have that? In some contexts, it's even more challenging in the fact that the data is not necessarily susceptible to format. And so, but what I mean by that is that maybe we've got a data set that actually contains the ages of people, but the age is not consistently in the same place on every single line or row of detail. So, like I say, like we got observations, and we want to put these all in columns so we can identify attributes, but the age appears in a different field on every single line of data. So cleaning can certainly be problematic in that regard. Integrity, is the data accurate, valid, and consistent over time? This is certainly problematic as well, as data tends to be very volatile, as we talked about before, tends to be vary in scope. And so if we want consistency, we're going to try to look for data sets that actually to be consistently reported over time, which can be very, very hard to identify, especially for those data sets that are naturally occurring. Stuff in an organization tends to be fairly consistent. It tends to be reported the same way. But if we're looking for, say, demographic data or geographic data, then we may not have the same detail in that regard. And the data type, is the data structured? Is the data internal? Are there privacy concerns with the data? This last one's a really, really important one, as this has become a really big problem with the types of data that people want to use. Not only do we need to know, can we access the data, but if we use the data, are we violating any standards that might exist with that data? So remember Cambridge Analytica at the beginning of the story, or beginning of our lecture here today? That was one where privacy concerns were really paramount, and they were ignored for basically misreporting of their scope. They said it was for research purposes, and where in fact it was actually being sold on external markets for profit. So that's something we have to be concerned about. Privacy concerns of the data. Privacy does need to be addressed, and it needs to be adhered to whenever possible. With respect to mastering the data, we want to consider whether or not we can use the data for the intended purpose. And I want to consider an issue, okay? You'll notice I got 2 logos up here. First one you should be very familiar with, okay? That's Microsoft Excel. You're probably familiar with the second logo also. This is actually an Acrobat Reader PDF symbol, okay? Has anybody ever tried to import a PDF into Excel? I have, and it's a nightmare, okay? It's an absolute nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare to be able to do something like that. Consider what the format is that a lot of PDFs actually can be derived from text or can be actually derived from print report formats, which is a little bit easier to import into Excel. Some of these are just scans of pages. Like if you guys took a scan of a textbook on a copier and then put it into a PDF, trying to export that into an Excel format is just really, really challenging. So this is something that commonly happens within audit engagements is that we'll ask for information, auditors will ask for information for their clients, and they'll provide it in formats that are not readable to the auditor. The auditor will say, can you provide this in Excel or a text-based format that we can import it and read it within our system? And they'll send them a PDF and say, here you go, here's our trial balance. And this is the frustration of being an auditor, by the way. So those of you who are looking forward to that, you may want to go tax. Sorry, yeah. Anyway. I'm not encouraging that. I'm too encouraged that. If you get frustrated at PDFs, then maybe something to consider. All right. But yeah, so what are some criteria that we actually have to follow? Well, this is going to be something specifically with respect to audit data standards, but actually is a very good standard set for a reporting, is going to be providing criteria for data files and fields to support business processes and external audits. So one of the things that we did in public accounting when we actually did manual journal entry reporting testing is we sent details to our clients and say, we need this particular set of information, and we need you to put it in a format that's readable according to our files. And if the client sent that to us, we could actually do the analysis. If the client did not send that to us, we would send them back a nice email that said, we cannot read the file as it currently sits. Please send us the information in this format, which actually happened more frequently than you might think because they have their own routines and we have ours. But the audit data standards basically defined how the information or how the data should be provided to us. I told you I was going to do it. How the data should be provided to us and in what format and in what structure so that we can actually perform our analysis as necessary. All right. Third step is going to be performing the analysis, okay? So determine what type of analysis should be performed. We've got 4 types of data analysis. This is in the slides, but I'm going to tell you right now, there is 100% chance I will ask you at least one question, in all likelihood, multiple questions on this particular slide as we move forward. This will not be the last time we visit this, by the way. We're going to perform all 4 types of analysis in this course. We're going to perform 2 of these, the first 2 on Friday, and we're going to perform the second 2 next Friday. But these are general types of analysis that we can perform over data, and they become increasing in complexity as we move down the scale. So first is basically just called a descriptive analysis. A descriptive analysis is just asking, based on the data, what happened, all right? You might think of this as basically an annual report in accounting, okay? Accountant's annual report, financial statements. Basically, all they tell you in that information is what happened for the previous year. That would be an example of a descriptive analysis. It's a very detailed descriptive analysis, but it does talk about that. Going a little bit further, you may even make an argument that they tell you a little bit not just what, but why something happened. That would be our second type of analysis, which is going to be a diagnostic analysis, okay? So a diagnostic analysis not only answers the question of what happened, but speculates as to why something happened. So there was a decrease in gross profit by 3% for the current year from previous periods. Why did that happen? Well, suppliers increased their prices, and because of the increase in cost, we actually had to reduce our margin for the period. So not only an identification of what happened within the data, but trying to speculate as to why something happened and provide explanations for it. Remember back when you were in 221 and you did that variance analysis? I think this is not the first time I've talked about this particular concept, and I keep bringing it up, and I'm sorry, guys. You know, chapter 23, variance analysis. Yeah, the variance analysis. Remember, one of the goals of variance analysis was not just to calculate those variances, but to also explain why the variances occurred. In effect, this was a form of diagnostic analysis that you've already performed, something that you're very familiar with. Moving forward, we start getting to more valuable but more speculative type of analyses. We have predictive analysis. Will it happen in the future? So looking at trends in the past, we try to determine what is going to happen in the future. All right, so we see trends in sales. Sales are increasing by 4%. Okay, will that continue to happen in the future? And if so, what are the implications for the business? Do they need to open a new branch? Do they need to expand production? Do they need to increase their operations? Do they need to hire and pretty personnel? Okay, Those are interesting questions, but we have to be able to answer the question, what's going to happen in the future? Once we've answered that question, that enables a very powerful form of analysis to answer those other questions I mentioned, talking about prescriptive analysis. Based on what we believe is going to happen, what should we do? We believe sales are going to increase. As a result, we need to hire a new chief of marketing. We believe sales are going to increase. We need to hire more people within production. We believe sales are going to increase. We need to open a new facility. So in addressing the question of what's going to happen, we can also look at the questions about what should we do, what should our necessary response be. Again, these tend to be more subjective than the previous two because we're doing a lot of speculation about what we think is going to happen in the future. And the problem with that is we could be wrong, okay? We could be wrong about what's going to happen in the future. But it does provide some valuable analysis and insight, assuming that we at least have some degree of accuracy. So that's step 3 in performing the analysis. Step 4 is that next we're going to share the story, okay? Once we have performed our analysis, we need a way of presenting that detail, presenting that information that is valuable to stakeholders. In the past, we've talked about this. We've talked about very, very rote formats. But we're going to talk about a very special form of presentation. We'll expand on it more in chapter 11, so that's going to be continued. I have nothing more to say on this slide up until we get to next week. Now, with respect to this is an important point to note, is that the detail, the way that we present information is going to be more valuable if we can actually provide it in a way that's meaningful to other individuals. Remember we asked the question, this is something we talked about early in the semester, why don't we just provide all of the detail, all of the data to every stakeholder? Aside from proprietary concerns, it's important to note that just providing raw data does not provide any meaningful insight. That is the whole purpose of data analysis. So in addition to performing analysis, we need to understand that people who are using this data, the people who are using this information, I specifically mean information in this context, the people who are using this information, they want information that is relevant to their decision making. And not every single piece of data that an organization generates or collects is going to be important to that. So keep this in mind as we move forward to chapter 11, is that something that we need to be concerned about is, can we provide or present information in a way that's meaningful to the people who are going to use this information? All right, to kind of wrap up this discussion, we need to talk about some cost considerations. So statements on financial accounting concepts, number 8, we talked about that during the exam. That was one of those questions I said, remember, that's that the cost of providing any detail cannot exceed the benefit of that. This is certainly problematic with respect to data analysis because it can be difficult to quantify the benefits. It's very easy to quantify the cost. You can look at how much something costs to do. The question is that how do we quantify the benefits? So we need to be very, very careful in our approach and make sure that we do this analysis, that we can actually provide some sort of insight as to what the potential benefits are. So what are some costs that we have to consider? Well, first of all, we need the necessary personnel, employees with the skills to prepare and analyze the data. Now, the good news is that we're starting to see a lot more knowledge in this area. This is something that back when I was doing in accounting, and again, I always feel awkward about doing this. At some point, I am genuinely going to sound like that crotchety old man back in my day. All right. I don't think I'm there yet, but I'm getting closer every single day. But back in 2005, when I first started doing accounting and performing this analysis, there was a limited set of people who had this skill because data analysis of data and understanding of this process was somewhat restrictive in scope. We had a lot of people who were really, really good in Excel, some people who were not so good in Excel, but nobody with really any tools other than that. So trying to identify necessary personnel is going to be important, which is also kind of why it speaks to having a broad set of capabilities. So those of you who are in business and accounting, you probably have got other courses that are in other disciplines that have said this is really important, like statistics or computer science or programming, things along those lines. Why do we insist upon taking those disciplines, even if they're outside of your particular major? The answer is because these all relate to your ability to be able to analyze information or prepare information and analyze data. So this is a really important skill set and something that we take our pride at this university of making sure we have graduates who can do that moving forward. And hopefully that's something that's kind of resonating through that. Also, storage. Massive data requires massive storage platforms. You've probably heard the term cloud before. By that, I don't mean those things that are floating in the sky, okay? All right. When we talk about cloud computing, this kind of meets a need for organizations to be able to store massive data amounts, massive data value. So cloud computing basically is going to address this need of being able to store massive data. We got companies that their entire business model is just storage of this data that companies may potentially use at some point in the future. Now, if you get really, really paranoid, you could say that all data is being stored at all points in time. This is something that I hope to God she doesn't watch this video, but one of the professors at a different university was talking about all data is being stored at all times. So everybody who's got one of these right now, anything that you say is being recorded and being captured and being recorded on the dark web. I don't think that's the case. I think this only activates when I say, hey, Siri. Yep, there we go. All right. So yeah, but I don't think everything that I say is being captured, but there are some people out there who do believe that. If that's the case, consider the volume of data that's being recorded just on a second-to-second basis. All right. Just within this classroom alone, we've got probably what 26 telephones that are capturing data. Okay, so every single one of those is actually capturing my voice and saying, wow, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. But it's actually capturing it and going to data on multiple different platforms. And if we're talking about that, then we're just talking about an immense amount of data just on a second-to-second basis. Even if we're just talking about a fraction of that, still enormous amounts, all right? And all of this has the potential to be converted into value at some point. That's one of the concerns we have. With respect to that, we also have concerns about processing. The cost of technology and processing power required to perform data analysis, these can be enormous. That word enormous does not do this justice, okay? As we start seeing evolution of data analysis methods, we're starting to see more and more needs for processing power. This is kind of interesting. This was another one of those things that evolved from the conference that I went to. So you guys have cutting edge information because I just learned this last Friday. But relative to like a Google search query, how much power do you think is used by an AI query? So do you think they're roughly the same amount? Which do you think probably uses more power, a Google search query or an AI query? It is an AI query by a factor of 6. So every single time that you run a query in AI, you're using 6 times the power that you would use for a regular Google search. This is eating up power demands in many organizations. As these organizations are starting to move towards AI tools for a lot of their analysis, they're basically seeing immense increases in their power bills. They were talking about one of the organizations saying when they implemented AI, they saw an increase in magnitude of power cost by a factor of 2 just for the whole organization. That's kind of ridiculous when you think about it. Imagine your utility bill that you're paying right now, and then all of a sudden you switch over to just using ChatGPT for some of your assignments, and your utility bill jumps up by twice as much. That's probably not going to directly happen to anybody in this room, but would you be a little bit outraged if something like that happened? And we're only on the cutting edge right now. We're only on the basic level. Imagine when most organizations are using these tools, these processing tools, these complex analysis tools. We're probably just going to see immense increases in that. One thing that we're starting to note is that there's demands for power. Has anybody read in the media recently about 3 Mile Island in New York? So 3 Mile Island is an old nuclear facility that was shut down. I think it was back in the 1980s because of an accident that occurred there, where there was a lot of problems. So people are really concerned about nuclear power and the potential dangers and risks for it. They recently opened that up, and it was actually a big company, for one that you probably know. I'm not going to say their name, but their initials are MS. Okay. And they actually funded the restoration of this particular facility just so they could actually have power to restore operations in that area. We're starting to see a lot of former nuclear facilities that were shut down being reopened again, not just here in the United States, but worldwide. What is the direct need for that? This is it right here, the need for processing power, for being able to perform these data analysis tasks. Because the more information that we can actually generate from this, the better decisions we can make. And that's a good thing. But also there is an externality associated with that, an external cost that we have to concern ourselves with. This is probably one of the big ones we have to be worried about, and it's only going to become more prominent in the future. So we're going to be probably very focused on renewable sources of energy, and we can't have renewable sources of energy, then they're probably going to go to traditional sources of energy, even those ones that are viewed as risky, like nuclear energy. Which, by the way, just as a context, nuclear energy is not as bad as you may have read in the story. We're not going to all get radiation poisoned and start growing extra arms, okay? We're not to that point, at least not yet, okay? So we're still pretty safe for now. but it's an interesting implication for what's happened in our very recent history. We're talking about within this past year, a lot of these things have happened. So some very big concerns for us moving forward and a direct result of just this particular effect right here. All right, so we are done with chapter 10. We will revisit this topic to some degree in chapter 11, but we'll come back on Wednesday for next week. I'll see you all then.